That was the number Hob Galloway gave me, standing in the blossom yard door with his hat crushed in both hands, and the 11th was already walking away down the lane holding his wrist against his coat. I watched him go. He did not look back at the yard, or at me, or at the low gray shape lying in the straw under the pear tree with his ribs going up and down too fast. 11 healers, Hob said. Sire, there are not 12. Then send to Brindlemere. I sent to Brindlemere on Tuesday. They sent Cobb. Grythe lifted his head. He was 17 years old, which is 4 years past what any wolf is owed, and gray to the shoulder now, and he had walked at the left knee of my father and my father's brother before he ever walked at mine. He got his front legs under him, which took him a long moment, and he looked at the gate the 11th healer had gone through, and then he lay down again with a sound I had not heard him make before. I went to him. I had been going to him for 11 days. He let me put my hand flat on the ruff behind his ear, because he had let me do that since I was 6 and could not reach any higher, and then when my fingers moved a hand's width toward his jaw his lip came up off his teeth, and something in his chest made a noise like a door being held shut. I took my hand back. Sire, Hob said, from a careful distance. He isn't wrong, I said. That's what none of them understand. He isn't mad and he isn't turned. He's telling us where. He's told 11 men where, and now 3 of them can't grip a spoon. The blossom was coming on all over Cassinmore. You could smell it in the yard, thick and stupid and sweet, from the Ninnyker and the long slopes above Coldbrook, all that white going up the hills like snow that had lost its way and come in the wrong season. In 3 weeks the whole kingdom would come down out of the orchards for the blossom assize. 600 people in the meadow below Applegarth Hall, the grafting knives blessed, the tithe of the first bloom counted, and their king standing in front of them all with his gloves on and his hands still. My hands. There is a thing about my hands I have never told anyone, and I will tell it now because everything after depends on it. They are cold. They have always been cold, cold in high summer, cold in a hot bath, cold on the neck of a horse that has just run 4 miles, and they are quiet. A blister does not trouble me. Nettle does not trouble me. I once carried a kettle across a room by the body of it and set it down, and only knew what I had done when the steward began to shout. My father had the same hands and his mother before him. In Cassinmore they call it the king's steadiness, and they say it approvingly, and every child in every orchard is told that a king does not flinch. Nobody ever asks whether a man who does not flinch is brave, or whether he is simply not being told anything. So when Master Alder Cobb came out of the hall behind me, drying his hands on a cloth he did not need to dry, I did not flinch at him either. Sire, I have said all of it, and I will say it once more and then hold my peace. He was a good physic. That is the part people leave out when they tell this story now. Cobb had set my shoulder when I was 11 and pulled a boy out of the Coldbrook Mill race and breathed him back, and sat up 4 nights with the fever in Ninnyker when the priests would not go in. He was 62, and vain the way a man is vain who has been right in front of witnesses many times. There is nothing to find. I have had my hands in his mouth. There is no bone lodged, no thorn, no growth I can feel. He is old. Old wolves die of being old. He was hunting in the frost. He was walking in the frost, sire, at your left knee, because he has always walked there and he would do it with a leg off. Cobb folded the cloth. The kindness now is a fast one, before the assize. I would do it myself, and I would do it in the yard with no one watching but you, and I would not let him know it was coming. Behind me Grythe had begun the thing he did in the evenings, which was to lick at his own foreleg, over and over, at a place where nothing was wrong, because the place where something was wrong could not be reached. He drinks, I said. He does. He can't swallow the meat, he can drink. Sire, a thing that is dying of being old stops drinking last. He drinks first and won't eat. That's not age. That's a door in him that won't open. Cobb was silent for the length of 3 breaths, and I will always give him that. He was capable of being silent when a man made sense. "Then find me the door," he said, "and I will open it. But I am the 11th, sire, and the 11th is the last, and I have known you since you could not reach his ear. In 8 days that wolf will be too weak to stand, and then the thing that kills him will not be a knife. It will be 4 days of drowning in his own throat. I will not stand in your yard and watch that. I will resign the physics chair and go to Brindlemere first." He bowed and went in. I stood in the blossom yard until the light went orange and Grythe slept, and Hob Galloway stood at the gate the whole time in the way a good steward stands, which is as though he happens to be there for reasons of his own. At last he said, "There's a girl at Coldbrook." "A healer?" "No, sire, nothing like." He turned his hat around. "She works the byre, beasts that are past helping, the ones the drovers would knock on the head, they leave them with her instead, and she sits with them. She sat with them 9 springs that I know of. She's not a healer. She doesn't physic them. She only—" He stopped, and I watched him fail to find a word that didn't sound foolish said out loud to a king. "She holds them, so they're not on their own at the end. And they don't fight her. Sire, I've seen a boar that broke a man's knee in the morning go quiet in her lap by dark. Cobb says it's because she doesn't know enough to be afraid, and animals can't tell the difference between ignorance and calm." Hob turned his hat again. "I've watched her 4 years, and I don't think that's it." "Then bring her." "I don't think she'll come." I looked at him. "She has cause," Hob said, and would not say what the cause was, and that, more than anything, is why I rode down to Coldbrook myself that evening instead of sending 4 men and a cart, which is how kings usually collect people who do not wish to be collected. The Coldbrook byre sits low under the hill with the water running behind it, and the whole of the slope above it was white with pear blossom that year, so that riding down through it in the last of the light was like riding down through a held breath. Petals were coming off in the wind and lying on the water and going away, and the smell was so strong it was almost a taste. The byre door was open. There was 1 lamp inside, set on the floor rather than hung, so that the light lay along the straw instead of falling on it, and in the light there was a girl sitting with her back against the wall and an old ewe lying with her head across the girl's lap. The ewe was dying. Anybody could see it. Her sides were pumping and her eye was showing white, and her legs made small running movements against the straw, and the girl was not doing anything about any of it. She had 1 hand under the ewe's jaw and the other laid flat along her neck, and she was talking, low and unhurried, the way you talk to somebody who is going on a journey in the morning. I stood in the doorway, and she did not look up. "Door," she said. I moved out of the wind and shut it behind me. "Thank you," she said, still not looking. "She's cold, and she's stopped being able to keep herself warm, and the draft frightens her more than I do. If you've come for the tally, the book's on the sill, and I don't sign it. Marn signs it. You can tell Marn I said the roan bullock is going to live, and he owes me a shilling." "I haven't come for the tally." She looked up then. I had expected something. I do not know what, a wildness, a strangeness, a woman with her hair full of straw and her wits somewhere else, the way the story would need her to be. What I got was a woman of perhaps 26 with a plain, clean face, and mud on her boots, and an expression of the most complete, unhurried patience, and she looked at me the way a person looks at weather. She was wearing gloves, good ones, leather, worn soft, laced tight at the wrist, in a byre, in the warm. "Sire," she said, and did not get up because the ewe's head was on her lap. I'd stand. "Don't." I wasn't going to. She said it without any edge at all. That was the thing about Nell Hawes that took me the longest to understand. She was not defiant. Defiance is a thing you build out of fear and then stand behind. She simply said what was true and let it lie there in the middle of the room, and if you wanted to pick it up, that was your affair. The ewe's legs ran again, small and useless. Nell's thumb moved once slowly along the jaw. The running stopped. "Hob Galloway says you sit with beasts that are dying." "Hob Galloway talks. He says they don't fight you." "They fight me plenty. That one bit me on Sunday." She tipped her chin at nothing in particular. "She's forgotten now. My wolf is dying." "No, everybody knows. 11 men and the last one a lord's physic and half the Ninniker laying wagers on whether he goes before the blossom's off." She looked down at the ewe and adjusted her arm, and something went out of the animal's neck, all along it, the way a rope goes slack. "I'm sorry, truly. He's walked past this byre with you at the head of a hunt every autumn since I was a girl, and I always thought he was the finest thing in Cassenmore. Finer than the horses. Finer than you, if you don't mind." "I don't mind. I'm not coming." The wind came off the water and pushed at the door. Somewhere up the slope, a nightjar started. "You haven't been asked. You've ridden down here yourself in your good coat at dark," she said. "I'm not slow, sire." "Then tell me why." And there it was, the first thing I ever saw crack her. It was very small. Her jaw set once, and she looked away at the lamp, and when she answered a different question, which is what people do when the true answer is heavy. "I don't heal anything," she said. "I want that plain. I've never healed a beast in my life. I don't know what a fever is or what to do about it. I can't set a bone. I don't know herbs from hay. What I do is I hold them so the last hour isn't spent alone in the dark being frightened. That is the whole of it. If I came up to Applegarth and put my hands on your wolf, they'd all stand round the yard and wait for a miracle, and they'd get an old wolf dying, which is what they've already got, and then they'd have somewhere to put it." She looked at me. "They'd put it on me, and then I'd not be the girl who sits with beasts. I'd be the girl who killed the king's wolf, and Marn would find another buyer hand by Michaelmas, and I would have nowhere in the world to be. I would not let that happen." "Sire," she said, quite gently, "you have no idea how much of my life has happened while you were not letting it." I had no answer for that. I had never in 29 years been spoken to in that particular register. Not insolent, not pleading, simply informative. The way you'd tell a man his horse had thrown a shoe 2 miles back and he hadn't noticed. The ewe died while we were looking at each other. There was no drama in it. The pumping sides slowed and then were still, and Nell knew before I did, and she did not startle or bow her head or say anything holy. She sat for a while with her hand where it was. Then she eased out from under and got up stiff and stood. She was tall. I had not expected that either. "Marn will come at first light," she said. "I'll wait outside with her till then, but you needn't. You'll want to be back before the hall's shut." She said it as a dismissal of a king from a shed, and she meant nothing by it at all, and she turned to take the lamp. I don't know what I thought I was doing. I have gone over it many times since. I think that after 11 days of a room going quiet whenever I entered it, and 11 men walking down my lane holding their wrists, and a physic offering me a merciful knife, I had simply arrived at the end of the place inside me where reasons are kept. She turned to take the lamp, and I reached out and closed my hand around her wrist. And I felt the cold. Not the cold of the byre, not the cold of leather. A specific cold arriving in the middle of my own palm from nowhere at all. The deep, aching, bone-set chill of a hand that has been holding something dying for 3 hours in a stone building at the end of winter, the ache in the knuckles, the stiff burn where the wind had got at the wrist above the glove. It came into me the way water comes into a boot. I felt every place her fingers were wrong. And I stood there in the lamplight with my own hands, the hands that had carried a kettle by its body, the hands my father called our steadiness, flinching. She looked down at where I held her. She could not feel it. That is the thing that broke me open, standing in that byre, and it had not yet been explained to me, and I understood it anyway, entire in one movement, the way you understand a sound in the dark. "Sire," she said patiently, "you're crushing my glove." I let go. I could not speak. I did not have the vocabulary. There is a word in Cassenmore for what happens when a man meets the one who is meant for him. Every child knows it. It is on the assize banners. The priests say it over the joined hands, and the word describes a great bright certainty arriving like a bell struck in the chest. And I have heard men describe it that way all my life, and it did not happen to me, and it never has. Nothing sang. Nothing rose. What happened to me was that I stood in a byre with a dead sheep on the straw, and for the first time in 29 years, my hands told me something. "How long?" I said, and my voice was not my own, "since your hands have felt anything?" She went very still. Nobody had asked her that. I understood it from her stillness. 12 years in a byre, and 100 people a season looking at the gloves and looking away, and no one had asked her a plain question about it, because it was easier to arrange a law about the gloves than to ask. 17 years, she said, since I was 9. What happened when you were 9? The cider press at Ninnyker. She said it the way you would say a date. I was small and I was quick and they let me clear the pumice from under the plate. Somebody's hand went to the screw when my hands were still in it. Both of them. The bone setter was a drunk called Fen Hoyle, and he put every bone back where he could find a place for it, and he cried while he did it, and he did a better job than anyone knows because I can grip, sire. I can lift a hundredweight. I can thread a needle if I look at it. The only thing I can't do is feel. Nothing. Nothing, not heat, not the cold, not a nettle, not a knife. If I put my hand in the fire, I'd know by the smell. She pulled the glove lacing straight with her teeth, an old, unthinking motion. So when the frost is on and everyone else in Coldbrook is nursing their fingers by the stove, I'm out. And when a beast is in a bad way and its teeth are in me, I don't snatch back. That's all it is. That's the whole miracle, sire, and I'd be obliged if you'd not tell it round the assize. That's why they don't fight you. They don't fight me because I don't fight, she said. Hands talk. Every beast alive reads a hand and none of them read anything else. A frightened hand tightens. A hurting hand snatches. A brave man's hand does both and he never knows it and the beast knows it before he does. She shrugged. My hands don't tighten because nothing tells them to. So an animal lies there and reads my hand and my hand says nothing at all, and after a while it believes it. I looked at my own hands. I had them held out in front of me, both of them, like a man checking for rain. And the gloves, I said. Ah, she said, and for the first time she smiled, and it was not a warm smile. You know about the gloves. I don't. No, she agreed, you wouldn't. The ordinance was 7 years old, and it was 3 lines long, and I had signed it at my own table in a room full of light, with a cup of pressed pear at my elbow, and I do not remember doing it. I found it that night. I went up to Applegarth and I sent Hob for the book of the fruit halls, and I sat in the cold hall with 2 candles and read every ordinance passed in my reign until I found the one, and it took me until the 3rd hour, and it said, "Item, that no person having hands scarred, maimed, or otherwise unwholesome to sight, shall handle the first bloom fruit or serve within the fruit halls at the assize, saving they be gloved at the wrist, for the cleanliness of the tithe and the comfort of the buyers." For the comfort of the buyers. The signature at the bottom was mine, made in a hand that was still learning how much ink a king's name takes. And then, sitting there with the book open, the rest of it came to me, not as a thought but the way a splinter comes up through the skin weeks after, arriving on its own schedule. 7 years before, at the assize, a girl of 19 had served at my own table. She had brought the first dish of pears and she had set them down and she had had her sleeves pulled long over her hands, all the way over, gripping the cuffs in her fists, and I had noticed only that the dish was set down crooked and that a knuckle showed strange through the cloth. And I had said something to the steward. I had said it kindly, I am sure. I had said something like, "Have her wear gloves. She'll be more comfortable," in the voice of a young man being thoughtful in front of his court. I never asked her name. I did not look at her a second time. She served the whole of that dinner, 7 courses, with her hands wrapped in cloth for the comfort of my buyers, and a month later 3 lines went into a book to make certain of it, and I signed them, and by the following spring she had gone down to the Coldbrook byre where nobody was buying anything, and she had stayed there for 7 years holding the heads of dying sheep. I sat in the hall until the candles guttered. Grythe came in some time before dawn, which he should not have been able to do, dragging his hindquarters a little on the flags, and he lay down under the table across my feet, not with his head near my hand, the way he had lain for 17 years, but with his throat turned away from me, protecting the thing in it. And even in his sleep, his breath went through him with a small wet catch. I put my hand on his shoulder where he would allow it. I felt nothing at all. My own hand on my own wolf, and it told me nothing, and it had never told me anything, and I had gone 29 years calling that a virtue. At first light I sent Hob down to Coldbrook with a cart, and a letter, and no soldiers. The letter said, "You were right that they would put it on you. I will make that impossible before you come. Nothing else in it will be easy, and I will not pretend otherwise, and if you come, I will not thank you for it in front of anyone because you would hate that. E." She came at noon. She would not go into the yard until she had walked all the way round the outside of it. Cobb was there. So was half of Applegarth hanging out of the windows and Hobbs under stewards and 2 of the 11 come back to see. Nell walked the yard wall from the gate to the pear tree and back again with her hands behind her, and then she said to nobody, "Take the dogs out of the kennel row. All of them. He can hear them and he can't get up and it's shamming him." Nobody moved, because she was a buyer girl in a mud-hemmed skirt. "Do it," I said. The dogs went. It took a quarter of an hour and the yard was full of noise and Grythe lay under the pear tree with his ears flat, and when it was quiet again his ears came halfway up and stayed there. "Now take the men off the wall," she said. "Mistress," Cobb began. "He's a wolf, sir. He's dying in a ring of faces. Would you?" They came off the wall. It left 5 of us, Cobb, Hob, 2 grooms with a hurdle in case a man needed carrying out, and me. Nell looked at that for a moment and I saw her decide not to argue about the grooms. Then she took her gloves off. I heard Cobb's breath go in. I do not blame him. I had not seen them either. They were not monstrous. That was the strange, small, unbearable thing. After 17 years of being a story about themselves, they were only a pair of hands that had been broken and mended by a drunk who cried. The fingers were not straight. 2 of them lay across each other at the tip, like crossed sticks. The backs were seamed white where the plate had come down. They looked like hands that had worked hard and been paid nothing. She rubbed them together briskly, the way you do in cold, and then she looked at them with mild irritation. "I can't tell," she said, "whether they're warm. Somebody put a hand on them and tell me if they're cold. He'll not want cold on his throat." Hob Galloway took a step, and I got there first. I put my palm against the back of her hand. Blossom was coming down all over the yard. It went on doing that, quite indifferently, while I stood there with my hand on hers, and the whole of the yard's morning arrived in my own skin at once. The grain of the stone dust on her knuckles, a nick on the second finger where something had bitten her on Sunday and she had forgotten, the warmth she could not vouch for, which was there, which was considerable, which was the warmth of a woman who had walked 4 miles behind a cart rather than ride in it. "They're warm," I said. She nodded and went to my wolf. Here is what she did, and I set it down carefully, because within a month there were 7 versions going round the Ninnyker, and every one of them had magic in it, and there was none. She did not go to his head. She went to a spot about 4 feet away, on his blind side, and she sat down on the ground with her back half turned to him, and she did nothing whatsoever for a very long time. Cobb stood at my shoulder and said quietly, "Sire, this is a performance." "Then it is a very boring one." "That is precisely how a performance is done." Grythe watched her. He watched her for the length of time it takes the shadow of a pear tree to move the width of a hand. His lip was up, not much. Then, by degrees, it came down. Nell said without turning round, "He's not guarding the throat. He's guarding the left of the throat. Watch him when a sound comes from the right." Hob dropped a pail. I have always suspected he did it on purpose. Grythe's head came round to the right, a clean movement, unbothered, and then back. "Right side sound," she said. "Left side he won't move at all. There's a bone in a wolf's neck, Sir Physic, that a man can feel from the outside. There is a chain of them, said Cobb stiffly. Then it isn't a bone. If it were a bone, he'd twist away from the whole neck. He's guarding a place, and the place is small, and it's under here. She lifted her own left hand and set 2 crossed fingers into the hollow beneath her jaw, high, close in to the throat. It's up under the tongue root. That's why he drinks and won't eat. Water can go past it. Meat can't. Cobb said, I have had both hands in his mouth. Yes, Nell said, that's why he bit you. And then she turned round and put her hands on the ground, palms up, and left them there. I have watched a great many negotiations. I have sat at treaty tables with the Brindlemere lords for 11 hours over a river. I have never seen a thing so slow, or so certain, or so entirely composed of nothing happening. She sat with her hands on the ground, and she did not look at him, and she talked not to him, particularly. She talked about the roan bullock that owed her a shilling, and about how Marne's boy could not whistle, and about the way the frost had got the low blossom at Coldbrook but not the high, and it went on in that low, unhurried voice, and it meant nothing. And after a very long time, an old gray wolf who had let no living hand near his head for 11 days got up on 3½ legs, crossed 4 feet of trodden straw, and put his muzzle into her open palms. Behind me, I heard Cobb sit down on the mounting block. She did not close her hands. That is the whole of it. She let her hands stay exactly as they were, open, upturned, holding nothing, and Grythe stood over them with his eyes half shut and his breath going in and out through the wet ketch. And then all at once his legs let go and he came down on his side, hard into the straw, with his head across her lap and his throat, his ruined left throat, turned up to the sky. The yard was so quiet I could hear the blossom. Now, Nell said, in the same voice she had used about the bullock, somebody had better tell me what I'm touching because I can't feel a blessed thing. And every man in that yard looked at every other man in that yard, and none of them moved, because a wolf that had crippled 3 healers was lying with its throat bare across the lap of a woman with no feeling in her hands, and the only way to find the door in him was to send a hand in after it, and there was not a person in Cassenmore whose hand would not tighten. Except one. I knelt down in the straw. I heard Cobb say my name, and I heard Hobbs say nothing at all, which was Hobbs' genius, and I got down on my knees beside the wolf that had walked at my father's left knee, and Nell Hawes turned her head and looked at me from 6 inches away with those steady eyes and said, low, only to me, Sire, if you flinch, he'll take your hand off. I know. You don't. You've never flinched at anything in your life. That's not the same as being able to stop. I have flinched at exactly one thing, I said, and it was yesterday in a byre, and I have not stopped since. She frowned at me. She did not understand. She would not understand for another 8 days, and by then it would be too late for either of us to be sensible about it. Put your hands under mine, she said. Not on him, under mine. Let it be my hands he feels. I did. I slid my palms beneath hers where they lay open in the straw, so that the whole weight of an old wolf's head came down through her crooked, broken fingers and into mine, and the moment I took her weight the yard went away. Fur, not the idea of fur, the actual coarse guard hairs and the soft under it, and the heat coming off him, wrong heat, a fever heat. And the pulse in his throat going too quick and too light, and the wet catch in his breath arriving in my hands as a small stutter, and all of it coming into me not through my own skin but through hers, doubled, magnified, appallingly clear, the way sound comes to a man who has stopped a leak in the roof. She could not feel any of it. She was looking down at the wolf with her patient face, and her hands were doing the finest, most delicate work in the kingdom, and telling her nothing at all. I heard myself say, move your left thumb a half inch toward me. She did it without asking why. And I felt it, deep in under the jaw, past the great artery, up beneath the root of the tongue where no physic's fingers had gone because no wolf on earth would let them, a hardness, small, not bone. Bone has a grain and a give. This was flat and it had an edge, and when her thumb passed over it, the pulse under her palm went hard and fast, and Grythe's whole body made one long shudder from the shoulder to the tail, and then went still again and lay there, and let her keep her hand where it was, because her hand had not tightened. "There," I said, my voice came out wrong. "Hold, don't move it, hold." "Sire," said Cobb from very far away. "Sire, what are you doing?" I did not answer him. I could not. I was kneeling in the straw with my hands under a buyer girl's ruined hands, feeling for the first time in my life, and through another body, and with a clarity that made me want to weep like a boy, a wrong shape in the throat of my father's wolf. Iron, a splinter of it, flat and barbed and no longer than a thumbnail. Not sickness, not age, not the merciful knife. "Nell," I said, "there's iron in him." She turned her head. 6 inches. The whole orchard was letting go of its blossom above us, and one petal had come down and was lying on the gray fur beside her wrist, and she did not know it was there. "How," she said, "could you possibly know that?" And I knelt in my own yard in front of my own physic and my own steward, and I found that I could not tell her without telling her all of it: the buyer, the frost in my palm, the 17 years, the 3 lines in a book, the fact that a bell had never rung in my chest and something far stranger and far quieter had happened instead, and that if I told her any of it now in this yard, with her hands full of my dying wolf, she would take them away. So I said, "Ask me at the gate," and she looked at me a moment longer, and then she let it go and turned back to the wolf. That was the 11th day. There were 9 more before the assize, and on the 3rd of them, while I was 5 miles away at Brindlemere and could not be sent for, Master Alder Cobb came down into the blossom yard with 4 men and a set of good soft ropes, and did the one thing she had told him he must never do. End of part 1 words. Say continue for part 2, the binding, the fever, the yard turning on her, the blossom assize, the iron, the gloves, and the orchard, plus both updated trackers. Continue thought for 49's thought for 49 SSTORY, part 2. I came back over the Ninniker Ridge at dusk, with the Brindlemere River settled for another 11 years and a stone in my boot, and the first thing I knew was that there was no one at the gate. Applegarth is not a quiet house. At that hour the kitchen yard should have been all buckets and shouting. Instead, a groom took my horse without looking at me, and Hob Galloway came out of the dark under the arch, and Hob had been crying, which I had not seen in 22 years, not at my father's burning. "He's alive," Hob said first, "good steward. Sire, he's alive." Then he told me. Cobb had come down at noon with 4 men, and the soft ropes that are used for a horse in a fire. He had done it, Hob said, in the open in front of everyone, and he had explained himself first, at length, standing on the mounting block, that the girl's business was a diversion, that a wolf lying quiet was a wolf a physic could finally work on, that 11 days had been given to gentleness and 8 remained before the assize, that if there was truly a door in the animal's throat he would find it in 10 minutes with a light and a spatula and a firm hand, and if there was not, he would end it kindly before the fever did it cruelly. He had said all of this reasonably. He believed every word. That is the thing I want understood about Alder Cobb. He was not a wicked man. He was a man who had been right in front of witnesses for 40 years, and had come to feel that being right was a thing he owed the room. Nell had stood in front of the wolf. She had not shouted. Hob was very clear on this and repeated it twice, as though her not shouting were the injury. She had said, "He is not fighting you because he is savage. He is fighting you because his throat is the only thing he has left and you are going to sit on it. If you put a rope on him, he will tear whatever it is loose, and then he will drown in his own blood, and it will take him 4 days, exactly as you said, only it will be you that started the clock." And Cobb had said, "Kindly, kindly," Hob said. "That was the worst of it, child, you have no training," and had had 2 men lift her by the elbows and set her aside like a stool. Grythe had gone quiet in the ropes for perhaps 10 heartbeats. Then he had come off the ground the way a thing comes off the ground when it has decided, all in one piece, and the second rope had turned him in the air, and something in his throat had given, and the sound he made brought people out of the kitchens. They got him down. Cobb got his light into the mouth and his hand after it, and had it out again in a second and a half, with 2 fingers laid open to the bone. And by then there was blood coming out of the wolf's nose in a slow, steady string that had nothing to do with anybody's fingers. Nell had walked in among 4 men and a maddened wolf, ungloved, and taken his head in her hands and knelt down in it and stayed. She was still there when I came into the blossom yard. They had lit a lamp and set it on the ground rather than hang it. Grythe lay on his side in the straw with the ropes cut away and his ribs going like a bird's, and his head was across her lap, and the front of her was black to the waist, and her forearms were black to the elbow, and her hands were somewhere under his jaw where I could not see them. The yard was full of people standing very still, in the way of people who have watched a thing happen, and would now like to be told what they watched. Nell looked up. Her face was perfectly composed. Only when I got close did I see that she had bitten through her lip at some point and not noticed. "He stopped bleeding," she said. "It's under the tongue root where you said, and it's torn and it's swelling. He can't have water, I've tried. It comes back out through his nose." She said it in the Buyer voice, the roan bullock voice, and it was the steadiest voice in Cassenmore. "Sire, he has about 4 days, maybe 5, I'll not lie to you. If we do nothing he drowns." Somewhere behind me a woman said, not loudly but plainly enough, Told them a Buyer slut with claws for hands." I have never wanted to do violence. That is not virtue. It is only my hands, which have never told me when a thing was hot. I turned round and I looked at the yard, and I found that I did not know which of them had spoken, and that it did not matter, because 30 faces were wearing the same sentence. They had put it on her, in one afternoon, precisely as she had said they would, sitting on straw in a byre with a dead ewe in her lap and a king in her doorway. Cobb stood at the edge of the lamplight with his 2 fingers wrapped in linen and his face gray. I have thought since that he wanted me to strike him, and would have preferred it. "Sire," he said, "I did what I—" "Sit down, Master Cobb." "Sire." "On the block. Sit down and hold the lamp, and do not speak in this yard again tonight." He sat down. He held the lamp. He held it for 6 hours, and he was 62, and his arm shook, and he did not put it down, and nobody offered to take it. I sent the yard away. All of them. I did it quietly, and it emptied like water going out of a cracked jug, and then there was the lamp, and the physic holding it, and Hob at the gate, and Blossom coming down out of the dark on to a wolf and a woman and me. I knelt in the straw and put my hands under hers. The world arrived. That is the only way I can put it. Her fingers were deep under the jaw with a wolf's whole weight on them, and she could not feel a thread of it, and it came up through her into me. The fever like a stove door opened, the swelling gone tight and glassy, the pulse rabbiting, the wet catch that was no longer a catch but a rasp. And there, at the far end of her crooked left thumb, passed everything. The little flat hardness with an edge on it that had not moved a hair's breadth since the morning 11 days ago when I had first felt it, and that would kill him on Thursday. I made a sound. I am not proud of it. My hands, which had carried a kettle by the body of it, shook so hard that hers moved on the wolf's throat, and Grythe's breath hitched, and I made myself stop. Nell was looking at me. 6 inches again, the way it had been that first morning, except that now she had blood on her jaw, and there was no wolf's patience left to hide behind. "It's you," she said slowly, "isn't it?" "Yes." "You're feeling him through me." "Yes." "Since when?" "Since I took your wrist in the byre." I looked down at where our hands were, hers within his fur, mine beneath hers. "You had been holding that ewe 3 hours, and your knuckles ached, and your wrist was burnt with the wind above the glove. I felt every part of it. I stood in your byre with my hands on fire, and you looked at me and told me I was crushing your glove." She was quiet. Above us the whole orchard let its blossom go a little, the way it did when the night wind came off Coldbrook. "Does it go the other way?" she asked. Of all the questions. "No, no," she agreed, without any surprise at all, and something in me went down like a floor giving way, because she had not expected it to. She had never once in 17 years expected anything to go the other way, and she said no the way you say it about weather. "Nell, don't," she adjusted her arm, the wolf breathed. "Don't make it a gift, sire. I'd rather it weren't. If I felt him now, I'd have snatched back an hour ago and he'd be dead." "It isn't a gift," I said. "It's a debt." She looked at me for a long moment then, and I do not know what she saw, and she has never told me. "Ask me at the gate," you said. Her mouth twitched. "This is the gate, say the rest of it." So I said the rest of it, kneeling in the straw with my hands under hers, in front of a wolf and a lamp, an ashamed old man who pretended very hard to be deaf. I told her about the ordinance. 3 lines, 7 years old, for the cleanliness of the tithe and the comfort of the buyers, signed in a young man's ink. I told her about the assize dinner where a girl of 19 had set down a dish of pears with her fists in her cuffs, and how a thoughtful king had said have her wear gloves, she'll be more comfortable, and had never learned her name, and had gone on to be told all his life that his hands were a steadiness. She did not cry and she did not rage. She listened the way she listened to everything. At the end she said, "I remember the pears." "I know. You said it kindly. That was all. That's why I've never been able to be angry at it properly. It would be easier if you'd sneered." "Be angry at it now." "I've a wolf on my lap," she said. "Come back Thursday." We had until Thursday, and the assize was Thursday. And there is nothing in this story I would give back except those 3 days between. He could not drink. That was the whole of the arithmetic. Nell would not let anyone near his mouth with a spoon or a horn or a wetted cloth, because what went in came back through his nose and he panicked at it, and panic swelled the throat further. So she wetted his tongue with a corner of linen twice an hour, all day and all night, and she slept in 40-minute pieces sitting up against the pear tree, and I sat with her. And after the first night, nobody in Applegarth said anything about it because nobody in Applegarth was speaking to me. She taught me my hands. That was how she filled the time. I think she could not bear to sit and count his breaths, and I could not bear to be a king in a chair. She would take my palm and hold it against the wolf's shoulder, skin to skin at the wrist so that I could feel through her and say, "Now, that's fear, that little run under the hide. Now watch," and she would let her hand go dead and slack, and the run would stop. "Your hand is never dead," she told me. "That's your trouble, sire. You've been holding it stiff your whole life to prove you can. A stiff hand and a frightened hand say the same word to a beast." "What word?" "Careful," she said, and no animal on earth ever went asleep on the word careful. On the second night Alder Cobb came out with his instrument roll and stood at the edge of the lamp and waited to be noticed, and when he was not, he knelt down anyway, which cannot have been easy at 62 with 2 fingers stitched. "Mistress Hawes." "Sir." What did I fail to feel? She thought about it seriously, which was the only mercy in her and the largest. "Nothing," she said. "You'd have felt it if he'd let you get to it. He'd never have let you get to it. Not you nor 11 of you nor 40. He's a wolf, sir. He hasn't got words. All he could do was hold his throat shut and hope somebody sat down long enough to notice which side." Cobb put his instrument roll on the ground and unrolled it, and turned the lamp toward it, and did not touch anything in it. "There is a hook," he said, "5th from the left. It's for stones in a horse's foot. If a thing is barbed, you cannot draw it against the barb. You must turn it in the wound and bring it out the way it went in." He said this to the straw. If on Thursday a hand were in there that the animal permitted, and if another mind knew where the barb lay, then between the 2 of them. He stopped. He was a proud man, and he had come to the end of what pride can carry. "Between the 2 of us," Nell said, "we make 1 hand, sir. I'd work that out." She let him show her the hook, she let him show me. And then she said, "I'll not use it," and Cobb's head came up and she said, "Not first. First I go in with a finger because a finger says something to him that iron never will, and if he shuts his mouth on iron he breaks his jaw, and if he shuts it on my hand he breaks nothing that matters." There was a silence in which I heard my own heart. "Nothing that matters," I said. She turned and looked at me, and she was, for the first and nearly the last time, quite gently amused. "Sire," she said, "I've 2 hands in the world that can't feel a knife, and there is exactly 1 job in all Cassenmore that wants them. Do you truly think I'd rather have kept them pretty?" Thursday came white. There is no describing the blossom aside to a person who has not stood in it. The whole kingdom comes down out of the orchards, Ninniker, Coldbrook, the high slopes, the pear country over the ridge, and they set the trestles in the meadow below Applegarth in a great ring, and the first bloom is counted and tithed, and the grafting knives are blessed. And by noon there are 600 people standing in a fall of white that does not stop all day, and the ground is white, and the water is white, and every hat in Cassenmore has petals in it. And before any of it, the herald reads the ordinances of the fruit halls. All of them, every year, in a bawling voice, because most of Cassenmore cannot read, and a law that is not spoken is not a law. I had not thought about it. I want that written down against me. On the morning of the assize, with a dying wolf in my yard and my hands full of a woman I had wronged before I ever met her, I did not once think about the herald. Nell had come down because I asked her to, and she had come gloved, because the ordinance said gloved, and because she had spent 9 springs learning that the cheapest way to keep a life is to obey the small laws exactly. We stood at the head of the ring. The herald put his hands behind his back and began. Item, that no vessel of the tithe be of unclean metal. Item, that no person shall press upon the assize green. Item, that no person having hands scarred, maimed, or otherwise unwholesome to sight, shall handle the first bloom fruit or serve within the fruit halls at the assize, saving they be gloved at the wrist, for the cleanliness of the tithe and the comfort of the buyers. 600 people did not react. Why would they? It had been read every spring for 7 springs. It was a sentence about a thing they had never once had to think about, and it went by them like the blossom. Beside me, a woman in a mud-hemmed skirt looked straight ahead at nothing with her gloved hands folded, and her jaw was set, once. I opened my mouth. And then the ring broke open at the far end, and people began to shout, and to move sideways in the way that a crowd moves when something is coming through it that it does not want to touch. Grythe came down the hill. I do not know how. He had not been on his feet in 2 days. He had come out of the blossom yard and along the wall and down 400 yards of open slope, and he came through the parting crowd at a shambling walk with his head low and his hind legs going wide, and there was blood dried black under his jaw and fresh blood at his nose, and he came in a straight line to the head of the ring. And he stopped at my left knee, where he had stood at every assize of his life, where he had stood at my father's left knee and his brother's before that. He looked up at me, and he opened his mouth to breathe and could not, and he swayed, and 600 people watched the king's wolf go down onto the white grass in front of the tithe tables. There was a noise from the crowd, a single long ah, the sound people make when the thing they came to see is worse than they hoped. Cobb was there in 4 strides with his roll under his arm, and he stopped, and he did the bravest thing I ever saw a proud man do. He turned round to the whole ring and to the lords of Brindlemere in their good coats, and he said, in the enormous voice of a man who has told 40 years of people what was wrong with them, "I cannot help him. There is one person on this green who can." And every face in Cassenmore turned to look at Nell Hawes, and every one of them had heard, 4 minutes earlier, a law read aloud about hands unwholesome to sight. She stood very still. I have never in my life been more frightened than I was in that half-second, and it was not for my wolf. "Sire," she said quietly, "your law." It is not a law, I said. It is 3 lines in a book that nobody read to me before I signed them, and I am the man who put them there, and I will take them out in front of every person in this kingdom. But I will not use my wolf as the reason. Nell, you owe them nothing. Not one of them. They put it on you in my yard, and I let them. If you turn round and walk up that hill, I will walk up it beside you and let him die at the top. Blossom was coming down between us. The whole green had gone so quiet that I heard the herald swallow. She looked at me the way she had looked at me in the byre. Weather, a king was weather. You great fool, she said. He's lying on my foot, and she pulled the lacing of her left glove with her teeth. She took them off in front of 600 people. Nobody laughed. I have gone over that many times, and I do not think it was mercy, and I do not think it was me. I think it was that a woman took off her gloves in a fall of blossom and knelt down in white grass, and what everybody looked at was not the crossed fingers or the white seams, it was the wolf putting his head into them. Because he did. He was 3 parts dead, and he found her hands with his muzzle, and he laid his head in them, and he let his throat come up. Clear the tables, Nell said, without turning round. Somebody put a coat under his shoulder. Not you, sir, you've stitches. Master Cobb, sit where he can see you and hold the hook, and do not give it to me until I say, sire. I knelt down in the grass. Under mine, she said, same as the yard. Same as the yard. 600 people watched their king put his hands underneath a byre girl's ruined hands in the middle of the assize green, and I did not care, and I have never cared since, and if I had 100 years, I could not tell you what any of them thought, because when her weight came down into my palms, the world went away for the second time, and this time it did not come back for 11 minutes. Heat, God, the heat of him. The swelling was a taut wet drum under her fingers, and the pulse was so fast and so shallow that it was hardly a pulse at all, more a shiver, and his breath came through the closing throat with a whistle I felt as a vibration all the way to my elbows. And under it, deep, at the very end of everything her crooked left forefinger could reach, past the root of the tongue, the flat hardness, the edge. And now, because the tearing had moved it, because 2 days of swelling had shifted the ground it lay in a second edge, at an angle to the first. Barb turned. It's moved, I said. It's turned. The barb's uppermost now, pointing back toward you. How far in? The length of your finger and half again. Then I can't reach it and you can't feel it, she said. So we do the other thing. And she put her whole hand into my wolf's mouth. Somebody in the crowd cried out. Grythe's jaw shuddered. I felt it come through her. The great muscle bunching, the ancient plain instruction of a wolf's body, shut, and her hand did not tighten, and it did not shake, and it did not go slack in that dead way she had shown me either. It went patient. That is the only word. Her hand lay in my wolf's mouth, being patient at him, and after a long moment his jaw let go, and his eye rolled to find me. Talk to him, she said. He's never once in 17 years cared what I said. Then talk to me, and let him hear the shape of it. So I talked. I do not remember the words. I have been told by 2 men who stood near that I told him about the frost in the year I was 12, and about a hare, and about my father's knee, and that at some point I called him a bad-tempered old article, and that 600 people at the Blossom Assize heard their king say good lad over and over in a voice that was not a king's at all. And under all of it, my hands were doing the only work they have ever done. Left, I said. A hair, now up, no, down, down and left. There's a ridge, that's the tongue root, go under it. It's not going under. It is, turn your wrist, not your fingers, now stop. The pulse under her palm had gone hard. That's it, I whispered. That's the artery, come away from it, a finger's width toward me, slower, slower, Nell, there. Flat, small, an edge like the edge of a coin, and a hook off it turned back and buried in the swollen meat. I have it, she said. You have the barb, don't pull. I know. If you pull. Sire, she said, I know. And her voice was as level as if she were telling Marn about the roan bullock, and I understood then, kneeling in the grass, exactly what Cassenmore had thrown away in a byre for 9 years. "Master Cobb," she said, "the hook, put it in my other hand and take your fingers away." "Mistress, you cannot see." "I've never once seen," she said. "Give it here." He gave it to her. And then there was a space of time I could not measure. Her left hand held the thing in place, and her right went in beside it with a physics hook, and none of it existed in her at all, no heat, no pressure, no tearing, nothing. She was a woman kneeling in white grass with her arms buried to the wrist in a wolf and her face as calm as a lamp, and every particle of it came up through her hands into mine. I felt the hook find the iron. I felt it slip. I felt it find it again and hold. I felt the meat give around the barb, and the flare of the wolf's whole body as it gave. And I said, "Hold, hold. He's not fighting you. He's only remembering," and Grythe lay with his throat open under 2 hands and did not close his mouth. "Turn it," I said, "the way it went in, toward his shoulder, toward me and out." It came out. Nell sat back on her heels with her hands red to the elbow and something small between her fingers, and she could not feel that either, and she held it up to look at it against the white sky. An inch of snare iron, a poacher's snare, the barbed kind that is set for hare, and that the Coldbrook men swear on their mothers they have never in their lives set, filed to a point, rusted the color of old blood, turned back on itself at the end into a hook the size of a wheat grain. He had taken a hare out of a snare in the frost, 5 months ago, with me 40 feet away shouting at him about it, and the iron had gone up under his tongue where no hand on earth could go, and he had walked at my left knee all winter and never once told anyone, because he had no words and only one thing to say, and he had been saying it, over and over, by lying with his throat turned away. Grythe rolled over onto his belly. He got his forelegs under him. He got his head up. Blood and slaver came out of his mouth in a great string, and he coughed, a real cough, a proper deep one, the first true breath through an open throat in 5 months, and he shook himself from nose to tail on the assize green in a cloud of blossom, and stood there swaying, 17 years old, gray to the shoulder, looking about him with an expression of mild and total offense. Then he put his head down and drank out of the ceremonial water vessel of the tithe, which is a thing no living man had ever seen done, and drank it dry, and lay down in the grass. I do not remember the crowd. Hobbs says they went off like a shot fired in a barn. I remember only that Nell Hawes was sitting back on her heels beside me with an inch of iron in her fingers and blossom in her hair, and that she looked at the wolf, and then at me, with the first uncomplicated astonishment I had ever seen on her face. "Well," she said, "there you are then. They wanted to carry her. I stopped that. They wanted her up on the tithe table, and they wanted a speech, and by evening there would have been a song. And I have never done a better morning's work as king than the 10 minutes in which I prevented every one of those things. But I stood up in front of 600 people with my wolf breathing behind me, and I called for the herald, and I asked him to read the 3rd ordinance of the fruit halls again. He read it, hands scarred, maimed, or otherwise unwholesome to sight, for the cleanliness of the tithe and the comfort of the buyers. "I signed that," I said. "I was 22. I signed it in a warm room and never looked at a single hand it was written about. It is struck out. That is not a mercy, and I will not be thanked for it. A man does not get thanked for taking his boot off a person's neck." And then, because I am my father's son and I wanted very badly to give her something, I began to say the other thing, that from this day the buyer at Coldbrook would have a proper roof and a name and a stipend, and that its keeper would be called the King's Own. "No," said Nell Hawes. The green went silent again. She got up off her knees with her hands red and her back straight. "Sire, you'll not make me a law twice." She said it quietly, but the assize green carries a voice. It is built to. "I was 3 lines in your book for 7 years. I'll not be 3 more and better ones, and have every child in Cassenmore grow up knowing my hands by heart." She looked round at all of them, and none of them met her eye, and one or two of the ones who had stood in my yard on Tuesday looked at their boots. I'd like a roof on the byre. Marn's been asking 11 years. That's all I want off you, and it's not for me. Then she pulled her gloves out of her belt and looked at them a moment and put them back. And I took off my own. They are white, the king's assize gloves. Kid leather, 3 generations old, and there is a tradition about them, and a boy whose whole office is to carry them on a cushion. And my father wore them and his brother wore them, and I have not worn them since. I peeled them off in front of my kingdom and dropped them in the grass, and I picked up my wolf's water vessel and carried it, cold and wet and running down my bare wrists, and I felt every part of that, because a woman was standing close enough that her sleeve touched mine. Cobb went down on one knee in front of her, which she hated. He was crying, which she hated more. "Get up, sir," she said. "You'll have that lamp arm stiff for a week as it is." She would not stay at Applegarth. Of course she would not. She went back to the byre that night, and she sat up with a heifer that was calving badly. And Marn's boy ran 2 miles in the dark to say she wanted a lamp brought because hers had cracked. And I brought it myself, and got there at 3 in the morning, and stood in a doorway I knew, holding a lamp for a woman who was up to her shoulder in a cow. She did not look up. "Door," she said. I shut it. Grythe lived another 2 years and 4 months. He was never the wolf he had been. He ate slowly, and he could not run, and he took to sleeping in the kitchen where it was warm, which he would have died sooner than do at any other time in his life. And when he did die at last, it was in the sun on the flags outside the byre with his head across her lap, and she sent me no word until it was done, because she knew what I would have wanted, and she knew it would have been the wrong thing. I asked her that first night in the byre, with my hands full of a lamp and hers full of a calf, whether the strangeness was a magic, whether we had been made for one another by some old design, the way the priests say it and the banners have it. She thought it was a foolish question and told me so. I have come to agree. It never went the other way. Not once in all the years. She has never felt my hand on her hand, and she never will. The bone-setter Fen Hoyle did what he could, and he cried while he did it, and there is no more to be had from it than that. What I have is what I was given. When her skin is against mine, everything her hands are holding arrives in me, all of it exact, undiminished. The calf, the frost, the hot handle of the pan, the nettle, the wolf. 17 years of nothing, delivered to the one man in Cassenmore who had built a reputation out of feeling nothing either. I do not think we were destined. I think we were owed to each other, and that is a harder thing, and it holds better. I asked her, at the end of that spring, in the high orchard above Coldbrook, where the last of the blossom was going, and the ground under the pear trees was ankle-deep in white. I did not kneel. I had knelt enough in front of her that year to last us both. There was nobody there, no Green, no 600, no Herald, no crown, and I had thought for a long time about what a man says to a woman who will not be made a law twice, and everything I had prepared was rubbish, and I threw it away as I walked up the hill. So I only asked whether she would have me, plainly, the way she said things. She was quiet long enough that a whole branch let go above us. "You'll want an answer about the hands," she said at last. "They'll all want it, whether the Queen of Cassenmore wears gloves. They can want. I mean it, Edric, first time." She had used it once in the byre in the dark, and I had pretended not to hear, in case pretending kept it. "There'll be no pretty story out of me. I'll not have them saying the king's love made a broken thing whole. It didn't and it won't, and I'd not have it if it could." "Then let them say what happened," I said. "A wolf chose your hands and a physic knelt in the grass, and I have been telling you what you were touching ever since, because it is the one useful thing I have ever done with mine." The blossom came down. She stood there in the white with her gloves off, holding them in her fist the way she had held her cuffs at a young king's table 7 years before, and then she put her hands up, both of them, crossed fingers and white seams and all of it, and laid them flat against my face. She could not feel it. She never has and never will. She could not feel the cold of me, or the 2 days of beard, or the tears, which were mine and which were considerable. And I stood in an orchard with my heart going and everything in the world coming into me through her broken hands at once, and Nell Hawes closed her eyes and said, "Tell me what I'm touching,